here, mate.
Hello, I'm Zelmont, and this is my YouTube where I talk about random stuff and have Ark as a backdrop. Today's episode is residential schools. Here in Canada, it's kind of a blight on our history, and I don't like the way it's told. I think the way history is taught about it, it's we're missing the point. So, in today's episode, I'm going to get into this heavily controversial issue. I'm going to speak my honest mind about it. That said, I am sure I'm going to be called racist for what I really view as common sense opinion, but anytime you delve into something as racially charged as this, no matter what your opinion, that is bound to be the case with some people. Some people are just looking to be offended and will see racism where there is none. This is definitely residential schools. Definitely is a racially charged issue. Um, but like I say, I think the real issue with it got lost because the problem is like I say, it's used the way it's told around these days. It's you only hear the negativity about it, and it is used to push like this is something that all of Canada did, that all of Canada was behind, and blah blah blah. And to a certain extent, yeah, true, but for a reason, and that reason actually is still prevalent in today's society. Like you can still see the problem that actually was potentially meant to be solved by residential schools. So, were residential schools actually wrong? Is there some kind of an idea behind it that actually there does make sense? And if it does make sense, okay, well, where did residential schools go wrong? Obviously, with my line of questioning here, it's kind of obvious where I'm leaning towards here. These are definitely leading questions. But I don't think the residential schools, as a theory, were wrong. Because what was happening is something that you can find on reservations today, where you can find these generational abuse, where you can see lots of, well, generational abuse, both alcoholism, drug use, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and this follows the generations along. The one generation ends up learning it from the generation before it, and they end up taking it out on the next generation, who end up taking it out on the next generation, and so on. So, like, there is a theory of here, well, how do you stop this generational poverty? Well, how do you stop? One theory is that, well, you teach another new way to live. Like, you don't have to show another way of living. You don't have to live like this. That was the theory behind residential schools. And in that, I don't think it is wrong. I think it's absolutely correct. Do I think residential schools, as they were done wrong? Absolutely, and I think they were done wrong from the start. I think there were bad actors right from the start. But the theory behind it was not wrong, and I think it's wrong to label all of Canada as racist for endorsing it, when the theory behind it actually is a sound theory. Where residential schools went wrong is in one key important detail: voluntary versus mandatory. If the residential school program had been a voluntary program instead of a mandatory program, you would not have had the problems that you had. A lot of the problems were because a lot of what went wrong with the school with people outside didn't know. Like I say, most the general Canadian public that endorsed residential schools, they endorsed trying to end this generational poverty, trying to end this generational abuse. And that was what they were endorsing. They did not endorse pedophiles and whatnot having their way with a racial minority. That wasn't what was endorsed. It was meant to end a problem, to help people raise up. And like I say, I don't think that was wrong. What I think was wrong was that because they made it mandatory and they had to be there, they couldn't. There was nowhere else for them to be. If they left, the cops would just pick them up and drop them back off. Right? Like it was like they were like slavery, and it, like I don't agree. Once again, I don't agree with the one aspect of the residential schools. I don't agree with was the cultural genocide. I don't think that was right. And likewise, if it had been mandatory, if it had been voluntary instead of mandatory, and you could leave and go and re-immerse yourself within your cultural genocide would not be possible. You know what I mean? Like, what made all of the bad stuff that happened with residential schools happened because it was mandatory. If you had just allowed it to be, if it had been a voluntary program instead, you would have had the good without the bad. Now that said, the good would be more limited in scope, but it, like I say, it stops. You can't. It's human nature to have both the best and the worst in people, and so you can't assume you're going to have either or. You need to assume that both are possible. And so, where a stricter mandatory residential school program would be more encompassing if it was done by the right people, by your truly altruistic people. The fact is it's not human nature that's all you're going to, even if more good actors had ended up being in that program than what turned out to be. Like I say, you go look into the letters and whatnot. Right from the get-go, there was bad actors involved in the residential schools, and I denounce that 100%. But like I say, they would not have been able to have done what they done in a voluntary program. It was the mandatory nature that allowed those bad actors to have that ability, right? So even though it would limit the scope to have it be voluntary, ultimately, for obvious reasons, voluntary is the way to go. And like I say, and there's a problem, and like I say, because the reason that I raise this is because even today there is still times where people from a certain political persuasion or another will try and push this idea of indoctrination camps, and that's wrong. Why is it wrong? Mandatory. That's the lesson. That's the lesson about the residential schools. That's the lesson, and that's the lesson about any indoctrination camps, any re-education camps, like anything like of that nature. No, you can't do that. Not as a mandatory program. And as a voluntary program, propaganda can only get you so far. So yeah, what do you think? Am I off my rocker? Is there literally no redeeming quality benefits behind the idea of residential schools, or am I right? And it's really what made it so bad was that they made it mandatory instead of voluntary, and then the whole thing got a bad rep. Everybody just wanted to, instead of examining what actually happened and laying blame where blame should lie, everybody just wanted to say everybody is bad. So let me know in the comments. If you found yourself enjoying today's episode, leave a like, subscribe for more content, and please feel free to share. Until next time, later.
Thank you.
All right.